So I wonder what happens when the dream that you've been chasing turns out to actually be an illusion. That the path that has always promised security, fulfillment, now is actually becoming empty. That there is a progressive feeling of unfulfillment and meaninglessness. The way I see this full moon in Leo play out is that it's an illumination to the fact that the structures that once held our goals, our sense of direction, our values, even the stories that we needed as a way to find identity, have become destabilized. And this is not something that's happening on an individual level. This is something that's now becoming a collective story. So we have the T-square between Uranus, the Sun, and the Moon, and Mercury. We've got Neptune conjuncting the North Node, and we also have Mars retrograde in Cancer squaring Chiron in Aries. These collective symbols make it very apparent that there is a large and very potent shift taking place in our collective and individual psyche that is revealing that the path forward cannot be part of the past. There is no way that you can bring the past. The old way in which our sense of fulfillment, identity, our purpose, anything that once held meaning cannot be brought forward. This is the moment where it's now a transition into this new era, and we don't even know what that is. So that's what I want to pack today. I want to deep dive into these astrological transits and kind of help us make sense of how this full moon brings so much significance to this collective shift. So the way I want to go about talking about the full moon is like this. A good place to start would actually to go all the way back to the beginning of this year, when the nodes shifted into the signs of Virgo and Pisces. Do you remember the video I created where I talked about the significance of this nodal shift, and it represented the theme of decay leading to renewal? This is important to have as a baseline understanding for what I'm saying here, because that nodal shift ushered in the psychological and emotional theme for us to become sensitive, or that we would become sensitive to where things are drifting apart for us. And that drifting apart will lead us away from any form of structure that once housed a connection or a sense of meaning or belonging. And it's through this drifting that ultimately new patterns would form. Okay, so this full moon in Leo is representing, or at least the Leo part of it, the moon part of it, is representing where there's an undercurrent, a recognition, a sense that things are no longer feeling authentic anymore for you. And it's that sensitivity, like, oh, this is not a place or an area that I can feel authentic in, that I can be a part of. And so that energy then continues to keep amplifying, and it starts creating cracks within the collective zeitgeist that says, this is no longer meaningful, this is no longer fulfilling me, this is empty. So if we circle all the way back to where the Sun is in Aquarius conjunct Mercury, Mercury is in a new phase to the Sun, right, in Aquarius as well. So the Mercury energy over here is saying we need to actually recognize that we're breaking out of all outdated thinking patterns and ways of and language that once had meaning or purpose or definitions, and whatever it was that we feel of the past that's decaying actually is meaningless. It's like it's not important to me anymore, right? It's progressively becoming uneasy to try to go back to something that feels empty. And so part of that is also the decay of how we would think about things. But Mercury in this context is also saying that there's a need to think about things in completely new ways, which can be incredibly challenging because how do we know what the new ways are? But for some of you, you might actually recognize possibility or purpose or potential. Or in a way, think about that to solve some challenges or some problems within your life, you need a solution that's completely outside of your traditional way of thinking. The only thing that the Sun's doing at the moment is just saying, hey, by the way, this is a big area for change. And it's not a coincidence that we've just recently had Jupiter go direct. So Jupiter being in Gemini, Mercury new phase to the Sun, of course, this is about a radically redesign of the way that we think that is no longer part of the past. That's accelerating this progressive realization of that's not authentic and that's meaningless to me. That's feeling like empty. Now, of course, the square to Uranus and Taurus just amplifies this progressive unconscious realization that we've been shifting away from values that actually feel completely outdated for us and that we can't actually go back to or align with because it's no longer what actually is real. So this T-square is holding in our consciousness the tension for us to emotionally become aware that we no longer see, express, or recognize any sense of meaning or purpose within our lives if it's related to the past. This is a big change for us. And this is how the North Node conjunct Neptune is amplifying this internal space for ourselves, but also for the collective. And I'm going to jump into that next. So the North Node conjunct Neptune in Pisces is an important one. And it's very much influencing and permeating through this full moon in Leo. In fact, it is the major point of where surrender needs to take place. Because as I talked about in the video of the Virgo Pisces axis, there is a progressive decaying and drifting apart experience that we're all going to go through. This Neptune conjunct the North Node just symbolizes the onset of this decaying experience. How it ties into the full moon is that it speaks to the point where we're becoming more progressively aware of where the lack of purpose exists for us, where the lack of meaning exists for us, where the emptiness and the void is present. What's also really interesting and very powerful to understand about Pisces energy is that there's always a state of flux that is present and real and alive for people, because the order of how things are structured and put together is not present. So where do I go? Where do I belong? What is up? What is down? It's just very disorientating. So this is the type of energy that leaves people feeling lost, directionlessness. And this is also the place where, for the most part, it's not something that you can actually fight back towards. It's more of an acceptance that the drifting ultimately leads you to a new direction. So I wrote down some things over here of how this North Node conjunct Neptune could potentially be affecting you. And I'd love to hear in the comment section if this actually lands for you, like which one of these three statements, questions, are actually present for you and alive for you. So one of them is a feeling of drifting, right? Talked about drifting, burnout, right? And or a disconnection with what used to feel exciting. Right? This is part of what this energy is moving through and expressing itself through us, is that, right, you're noticing you're putting a lot of energy into it, and it's just this constant burnout energy. Or feeling disconnected with the things that actually felt exciting or meaningful. You might even question whether or not this is actually purposeful for you. The other one that I wrote here is the need to release expectations of what life should look like. That's a big one. Thinking about how we might dream or imagine into our world a projection of ideal states and then have expectations only for them to sort of be mirrored back to us in a way that shocks us. So understanding what types of expectations you might have is a great way to help yourself navigate through this North Node Neptune conjunction that potentially avoids, or not potentially avoids, but helps you maybe not get too stuck into the decay of the dream, should I say. Learning to trust intuition over logic, moving away from seeking external validation. So this one is a little bit different because within the Neptune energy, there is no logic. There's no order. And because so much of our sense of identity has been trained and anchored and conditioned into seeking external validation to say this is what your purpose is, this is what your life's meaning is, or your mission, when we naturally on autopilot just seek that externally, we don't actually realize that most of ourselves, or most of us, have been that it can be lost in the translation, because now all of a sudden that structure of value and purpose and identity and goal and whatever it is, it's no longer visible anymore. The signal is distorted, and so now your internal state becomes distorted. And that's one of the challenges with this Neptune conjunction. And that's, of course, why it's so important to see that this transition phase is not something to think about as, oh no, everything's collapsing and it's the end of the world for us. Well, yeah, it is. On one level, on a collective level, it is. Because everything that's symbolized and signaled and represented, the truth, the purpose, the goal, the values, that is no longer viable anymore. And a new arena, a new destination, a new environment is present for us, or is progressively becoming present, right? That's the Chiron in Aries energy, and Venus now in Aries as well, which is what the retrograde in Aries will also speak to. And I'll touch on that later. But there are new horizons that are coming our way, but it is going to feel incredibly foreign to us. That is where the new renewal will take place. But the old way of how we've been striving for purpose, the old way that we've decided what security is or established structure, that story is over. The experimental process of what it means to be human has come to an end, and we're in that transition point. So if you feel like you've lost a sense of direction, right, that's because the old maps don't apply. And this is the signal for us to start looking inward to find a deeper meaning that is different from the external world and what it has signaled to us. So now what I want to talk about is the significance of this Mars square Chiron, because that's the energy that's probably triggering a lot of the emotional instability and lack of safety that we're feeling as we navigate and enter the void. Okay, so the Chiron in Aries squaring retrograde Mars in Cancer, I think, is an energy that feels very tense at the moment. And of course, it's very palpable with the amount of emotional sensitivity that's present in the collective. The first challenge that we have with this type of aspect is the emotional reaction that is actually stemming internally from a deeper emotional response that we carry at an earlier part of our lives. So if I just focus on the individual story, each of us, when we're growing up, will be subjected to an experience that can be emotionally intense for us, right? That we feel that was something that was difficult to process. There was a lot of emotions around it. And that as we age, as we get older, we carry these sensitivities. This is the Chiron here. And part of the Chiron in Aries is signaling the attempt to heal and grow beyond some of these recursive patterns so that they don't become trigger points for emotional or displaced emotional expression. Mars retrograde in Cancer is prodding at that unconscious wound and bringing it to the surface. And it's in the sign of Cancer, so it says, here's where parts of us will feel unsafe. Here's where parts of our sense of stability or certainty or security will not be available. And that's where some of the challenge comes with, or most of the challenge comes with this aspect. And that because it's part of this full moon, it then comes into the way that we express ourselves, the way that we feel seen, the way that we feel heard. And unfortunately, the human race has been deeply disturbed by the lack of feeling acknowledged. You know, all you need to do is just be in an environment and feel ignored for a period of time and watch how your psychological state starts to create massive feelings of discomfort and eventually leading to projections and distortion. This is just happening on a collective level. So this is a very delicate and sensitive pattern that you need to be mindful of right now, because again, as I said, the beauty of it is that it's helping us understand where we carry core emotions within us that are still trying to be purged out and worked through. But on a collective scale, it also speaks to the sensitivity of belonging. Now, there are many examples in the collective at the moment that I can point to where there's a very strong sense of that Aries energy wanting to take our space in a new way, But the Cancer part bringing in this feeling of lack of security, lack of stability, lack of sense of belonging, and wanting to emotionally come into a new experience. Any new pattern that you grow out of will always feel sensitive and raw in the beginning because you don't have any resilience. Just like a baby when it's being born does not have natural resilience to the outside world. So it has to go through a process of being to get sick, to become accustomed to this environment and the germs and the types of viruses, right? And we're always susceptible to these things. So this Mars Cancer square Chiron presents the opportunity to come into deep connection with what our security is about and what our safety feels like. And what will trigger that inquiry is an underlying feeling of where we feel authentic, where we feel that we can belong, where we feel that we can feel safe. And you want to, with this transit, be mindful of the signals that are coming from your body and really explore inwardly what it is that is showing up for you and address that, because it will speak deeply to a story that is held in an earlier part of your life. Ultimately, this pattern is trying to push towards the progressive healing and breaking out of these patterns. But it does require a new narrative. It does require a new story. It does require some introspection and a recognition of what is old and outdated and needs to be protected, but also is not part of your future. On the collective point, again, Neptune North Node conjunction signals that disorientation, right? Where do I belong? Where is my home? Where do I feel safe? This aspect amplifies that. And part of that is actually pushing the realization that what was once safety, what was once security, what was once a place of belonging has now become untethered. And that is the significance of this aspect. And it is in a new phase. So this is, not a new phase, pardon me, but this is in a new energy. So as I said, resilience is not fully developed yet, but at the same time, it is something that is required. So one of the ways that we can approach this full moon energy is to see that this is a process that is unfolding within our lives. Unfortunately, we naturally want to fix things, right? We want to make it better so that we don't have to feel the discomfort of some of the challenges that might show up for us. But the idea here is to really actually come into a state of presence, although it might be difficult with this Neptune stuff, but presence. Maybe Venus and Aries is helping us here. But staying with a state of presence and really paying attention to what is actually emerging within yourself. Right? Why is this important? Because by understanding what is surfacing for you, you can begin to recognize what things are actually becoming outdated, right? What things have actually started to lose meaning for you? Where is the decay taking place, and where are you noticing the progressive drifting of your life starting to occur? Yes, it feels unsafe right now with Mars in Cancer squaring Chiron. So ask yourself the question, what is safety to you? Right? What does it mean to meet your own safety needs at this moment in time? Part of this full moon energy is not reacting to it with a sense of panic and chaos, but it's more about looking at where you can develop that resilience. So some of the things that I wrote down for us over here, some reflective questions that could also help, right, is where am I holding on to an outdated identity? As I said, again, the big part of this collective shift for us, an individual shift, is that our identity and our sense of safety is rooted in the past. This energy is breaking that away and forcing it to drift. So, of course, any feelings of safety and security that are rooted in old paradigms or old ways of thinking will be brought up to the surface. And then we're challenged to step into something fresh and new. And sometimes that will be real for us or available for us, and sometimes it won't. That's why presence is so important right now. What am I afraid to release? Of course, naturally, when you step into something new or you recognize that your security is rooted in an old behavior or pattern or response, releasing that means experiencing yourself in a new way, or experiencing yourself in a place that doesn't have any sense of groundedness. So of course, it's natural for us to stay back in the old pattern. But this energy is forcing the need to challenge these patterns and say, yeah, for this a new version of myself to erupt and to come out and to emerge, I have to create space for that. And that means also releasing parts of yourself that are no longer true. It depends on how we respond to the need for safety that dictates how individuals can feel stepping into something new. But it is a question that's important. How can I cultivate trust in the unknown? Again, something that can be incredibly disturbing, but also at the same time relieving in one way, because as we drift and let go of old processes and patterns and identities, the place for renewal will emerge. It's not like this energy is just a collapsing energy. It's a cycle of collapse that is also holding renewal. They're both present at the same time. It's just the transition point that I'm trying to help us with. So this energy right now requires that bravery, that courage to allow yourself to move into something new and to experience the decay of the old, and while simultaneously allowing yourself to recognize what the change might be asking of you. So this new moon is not about forcing answers. It's about allowing yourself to be present and paying attention to where the pattern of energy is moving so that you can then become part of that new energy. Okay, so here are my final thoughts on this full moon. It's very clear that we are in a deep state of transition, right? The feeling of safety and security that's underneath your feet that makes you feel that things are solid, that's no longer there anymore. And that naturally creates an underlying feeling of uneasiness, panic, the potential of not feeling safe. Part of this energy is the realization that that's something that we need to accept for the moment. It doesn't mean that it's nice to feel, but it is something that is present for us. Because there's so much Aries energy at the moment now, it's also important for us to recognize that we are emerging into new territory and into new circumstances, into new situations. And this means that part of the way that we psychologically respond to this new space is to trust what's emerging and to allow adaptation, right? To allow yourself to meet each moment with new expectation for what it is, rather than something that you might project into it and what you ideally want. That will help you minimize the amount of distortion or dissatisfaction that can come from these transits at the moment. So let me know in the comment section how this is playing out for you guys. I'm always excited to hear or interested to hear how this is playing out for you and what your thoughts are. And I've got two things to share with you. One of them is that if you would like to stay connected to us on our content, the way that we write the articles, any information that we share out about things that we do, I'm going to leave a link to the newsletter in the description. Okay. And on the screen right now, you'll see the latest video that I created, which is the Mars and Venus, and it's talking about the shadow dynamics, which I think you'll love. And it's also got a lot of interesting things about looking at our Mars and Venus from the opposite of the traditional pop culture way of how Mars and Venus is described. So enjoy that video, and I'll leave it on the screen at the moment. Until the next one, take care, guys.